Good evening. Welcome to MUFON Los Angeles. My name is Steve Murillo. I am the State Section Director for MUFON LA. We have a fabulous speaker for you tonight. His name is Chris O'Brien. There are a number of special locations in North America that feature a bewildering array of so-called paranormal events that include waves of UFO sightings, crypto creatures, abductions, unexplained livestock deaths, Native American sacred sites, and legends of unusual occurrences. Is there a connection between these seemingly divergent mysteries? Tonight, field investigator, author, and researcher Christopher O'Brien is going to present us with a formula for identifying these gateway locales and examining the evidence that there's a connection. But Chris contends that the connection may be far stranger than conventional thinking would suggest. For over 10 years, Christopher O'Brien has investigated and logged hundreds of claims of unexplained events reported in the San Luis Valley, the world's largest alpine valley located in south-central Colorado and north-central New Mexico. Working closely with law enforcement officials, ex-military members, ranchers, farmers, and an extensive network of sky watchers, he has documented one of the most intense waves of cattle mutilation reports ever compiled from a single North American locale. Christopher has built one of our largest regional databases of unusual occurrence reports, and his first 3 books, which he has available here, The Mysterious Valley, Enter the Valley, and Secrets of the Mysterious Valley, detail his in-depth investigations into this kaleidoscope of mystery and intrigue. UFOs, portal phenomenon, Native American legends, cryptozoological creatures, haunted sites, the occult, and secret military activity all are found in this huge remote alpine valley. O'Brien's latest book, Stalking the Tricksters, explores an apparent connection between divergent paranormal phenomenon, and he suggests that a collective causal mechanism may be creating manifestations of these events. O'Brien's out-of-the-box insight challenges the very perception of how we perceive. Christopher is also co-host of the popular radio program, The Paracast. I listened to that, it's quite good. And he has been featured on dozens of TV programs, including Ancient Aliens, UFO Hunters, Inside Edition, Extra, and he's educated and informed listener on hundreds of radio shows like Coast to Coast AM, Jeff Rentz, Open Minds, Night Siege, and every Sunday he's on the Paracast. Would you please give a warm welcome for Christopher O'Brien.
Say hello to my little friend.
There you go. Oh, nice.
I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do this with him looking at me the whole night. First of all, how about them 49ers? Okay, never mind. Well, you don't have a football team anymore, so you should cheer. It's a California team, right? Hello, my name is Christopher O'Brien. I am not, N-O-T, an expert. I don't claim to be an expert. If anybody calls me one, I correct them. Anybody gets up here and says they're an expert, walk out. There are no experts in this field, only people with better and more creative questions. Okay? I'm not here to solve or answer all the mysteries of the universe. Okay, I'm just here to try to get you to think out of the box. And at the end of this talk, I'm going to have a show of hands to find out if I have shaken the reality view of at least a quarter of you, 25%. I would like to see well, you'll see. Anyway, thank you very much for coming out, and thanks for MUFON LA to have me here. I'm in the midst of my little mini California speaking tour, for lack of a better word, and I really enjoy coming out here. I am a 5th generation Californian. There we go. I got to get the pointing thing down here. So there we go. Here's my first slide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover a bunch of material tonight. Here's my first slide. I'm going to save the role of the media until later. I think we're going to go through the historical information first. But first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to propose to you a quick overview of how we look at these wonderful, magical, mysterious events that have drawn us to this room and that are becoming increasingly more popular in the media. Right now, besides pornography, the paranormal is the top subject matter that is drawing programmers, producers, and TV shows to present information to the public. And as it says there at the top there, we have a need to believe in aliens and UFOs, okay? Even though a lot of us out there in the world consider this a fringe subject and not worthy of discussion, we do have a need to believe in these things. And we're going to talk about the role of religion and culture in belief systems as we go along. Skip the role of the media here. I haven't corrected my slide. I'm sort of tweaking this as I go along, but we're going to talk about the extraterrestrial hypothesis and how it has manifested itself through the years, through the myths and cultural information that has been passed down for millennia. And we're going to look at how that has been programmed into our belief structures, okay? Okay, some UFOs are definitely real, and there's a lot of different things out there that have been sort of tied to the UFO phenomenon, including abductions, crypto creatures like Bigfoot, unusual livestock deaths, as I like to call them. I don't like the mutilation word. It turns a lot of people off. Crop circles, religious miracles. And these things have been tied vis-a-vis the media to the UFO phenomenon, and I'm going to look at this quickly and see if there is really grounds for this connection to be made. Another thing that I have come up with is a formula to identify areas in our reality that seem to have a preponderance or more waves of UFO activity, a variety, intensity of unusual experiences, that it's like almost like there's a target on certain areas in North America and around the world that seems to attract this type of activity. And I've come up with a formula that we can use as investigators to identify these areas, and then I'm going to come up with some ways to possibly address hard data monitoring through the rigors of science to come up with some hard physical data. How many people can tell me if we have any physical evidence of aliens visiting this planet from elsewhere? Anybody out there? Show of hands. Somebody give me one irrefutable piece of scientific data that proves that aliens are visiting our planet. Oh, okay, in the back, all the way. Yeah. Yourself, okay. Well, welcome to Earth, my friend. Sit down, have a seat. That's not irrefutable, and it's not unequivocal, and we'll get to that, but thank you. I'm going to, this is the only time I'm really going to ask the audience to ask questions before I'm done with the first half. We're going to cover the first half of the presentation, take a short break, and then come back. I found in San Jose, I allowed the floor to kind of dissuade me from my program here, and we went a little long. We can't do that tonight, obviously. Okay. Once I get through the top part of the information, then we're going to look at the San Luis Valley, where I've been investigating for almost 20 years. I lived there full-time for 13 years and amassed quite a database of unusual occurrences. Not only did I monitor the UFO sightings and unusual livestock deaths, but I also monitored aberrant social behavior, unusual weather, unusual animal behavior, and other elements that normally you don't see in the MUFON investigation manual. So we're going to talk about a new paradigm or a new way to look at how to gather hard scientific data when looking at these wonderful mysteries that we're also intrigued by. Okay, as you can see, the whole second part of the thing, we're going to break it down, look at the government's potential involvement, look at ancient traditions and how they dovetail into what I call portal areas or hotspot areas. All right, let's get going. Okay. All of us have seen these wonderful images and rock art, ancient civilizations, art from Sumeria, and of course the work of Zecharia Sitchin and others. And one thing that comes through clear, very loud and clear to me, and I'm sure to you, is that something inspired these ancient people to depict these types of objects and beings. Okay, this is not something that you normally would equate with normal everyday existence if you were someone 10,000 years ago. So I'm going to zip through some of these images and just give you an illustration of how ancient man or prehistoric man viewed something that appears to be non-human. Okay, these images on the right there comes from Australia, about 5,000 BC. On the left, 10,000 BC from Italy. Could these be depictions of some sort of illumined state? Maybe these guys were gobbling mushrooms. Maybe they were smoking datura. We don't know. But we do know that these images indicate that something strange was going on thousands of years ago that influenced ancient man enough to depict these beings in the manner that you can see here. Of course, we can go on and on. There's tons of these types of images through history. I like the image on the upper right-hand corner there of the bearded Sumerian-looking guy who's kind of at the back end of a conga line. That's from Australia. That's about 4,000 years old. We also have these very interesting illumined images that were made popular later by the Roman Catholic Church as the halo. We can digress a lot and go into a lot of these images and break them down. This is my, it's kind of an illustration of where I'm coming from when it comes to looking at ancient traditions and morphing in modern technology. This is a shaman's cave. You see the three images of shamanic figures. And what I did was I put it into Photoshop and I morphed a burnout circuit board from my modem that lightning struck. And I morphed the two images together to show a melding of modern technology and ancient traditional images. Of course, we all know about Zecharia Sitchin. How many people out there have not heard of Zecharia Sitchin? Show of hands. Okay, good. Look at that. I don't think there's one person. Well, I don't need to digress too far. Of course, the very irascible, I took him to the airport once and had to undergo quite a drilling of my knowledge about his work, and he spanked me pretty good when we got about the fourth or fifth book. I do recommend Sitchin's work. There's lots of holes in his theories. Of course, conventional Sumerianologists, people who can read cuneiform, obviously have make some exceptions to his reinterpretation of some of the Sumerian terms. Most importantly, the word Shem. He reinterpreted that word to mean a rocket ship, and that pretty much is where you can base his whole theory off of that reinterpretation. I do recommend Sitchin's work. He did do a very good job, and hopefully he knows the answers now that he's passed on, right? Sitchin died, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't he? Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, I got to meet him once, and boy, he had me on my toes. Of course, he came up with this interpretation of Sumerian lore about the 10th planet, or the 12th planet, and Planet X, if you will. Of course, Richard Hoagland thought that Elenin, this comet that was recently introduced into the solar system, could be Planet X, and I guess coherent thought sequencing, like Dr. Greer proposes, must have broken the comet up into pieces as it disintegrated and fell into the sun. Of course, his theory about the 26,000-year orbit of Nibiru, the planet that the Sumerians referred to, dovetails nicely with the 26,000-year cycle that the Mayans have in their long count calendar, which is going to turn over next December, or this coming December. I will be down in Palenque the last 2 weeks of December, by the way. Anybody want to come down and join me? It's going to be the end of the world party to beat all parties. Please see me after class. I'll sign you up. I'm helping run 2 tours down there. I'm going to be shooting it in 3D. That'll be fun. Of course, I guess the real letdown will be the Bloody Marys on December 22nd. Well, I have a book there called The Doom Handbook. If anybody wants to buy into the end of the world scenarios, I prefer Y2 2012K myself. But if you're really worried about that, I have the Ultimate Survival Handbook. See me after class. One of the things that has struck me about Sitchin's work is how it has inspired other researchers to look at other ancient cultures and cross-correlate Sitchin's work with other cultures. And one person that I really highly recommend is Joseph Farrell and his book Cosmic War. I really have a feeling that he takes Sitchin's work one step further, and he does talk about Marduk and Tiamat and a potential cataclysm or war that may have occurred in the solar system that could have actually been, how would I put this without sounding ridiculous? According to some versions of the myths, we were actually supposed to be on Mars, and because of the cataclysm that occurred between Mars and Jupiter and the formation of the asteroid belt, we were actually transplanted here to Earth. So when people ask me, or say, oh, he's the guy that believes in aliens, I say, wait a minute, how do you know that we're not the aliens and that those things flying around are more terrestrial than we are? Okay, we'll get into that a little later. Let's give you a little teaser there. This is an image that I think that we should all be aware of. This is the winged globe. And this you find cross-culturally all through the Near East into Egypt. And this is an indication of some sort of form, human form or God form, that's able to fly through the heavens thousands of years ago. There's tons of these images. If you really do your research, you'll find in the Egyptian culture, the Chaldean culture, the Babylonians, all through the Near East, you're going to find depictions of these particular forms, and they indicate flight or God forms and flight. And moving right along, I'm whipping through this because I kind of went long the other night, so pardon me if I go too fast. Now, the image on the bottom is very familiar to most of us Christians, and these are cherubs. These are diminutive little forms. Notice they're kind of small little wings that couldn't propel them to the bathroom if they needed it. But they're very cute. They're very, they got those wonderful little cherub, the whole cherub symbol or archetype is quite I don't know, it's sort of not really represented in the original depiction from Sumeria, which is the top image of cherubs. Now, the images on the top, they look like something I wouldn't want to meet up with in some like alley or something. And it's interesting that the cherubs from the Sumerian version have devolved or evolved into the images that we see below from the Renaissance. And we're going to talk about that process too as we get further into my talk. Of course, we have, your Sistine Chapel image of God creating man. We have the fall of Lucifer on the right. These are all very archetypal stories that seem to indicate some sort of conflict in the heavens, if you will, that occurred in ancient times. And it's slowly, these stories have morphed over time. And we're going to talk about the process of how these things are integrated into the culture, how they stick in our sort of genetic memory even, and have evolved into completely different forms today. Of course, the jinn, how many here have heard of the jinn? Anybody know what a jinn is? Wow, only 4 of you. Well, everybody saw Aladdin, right? The Walt Disney movie Aladdin with Robin Williams playing the blue genie. One of my favorite cartoon characters of all time. Aladdin rubs the lamp, and what comes out? A genie, right? Well, that's a jinn. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Okay, I'm just kind of playing with you here a little bit. I went to an 8-hour David Icke lecture. I was kind of forced into it. His ex-wife gave me a front row seat, and I had to wear my sunglasses because I knew I'd fall asleep. At the end of the 4th hour, I realized he had spent 4 hours in a packed auditorium, 1,500 people, paying I don't know how much money. Damn, that guy, he can pack them in too. He's all over the stage. It's like, no, okay, I won't do that to you. Anyway, David Icke spent the first 4 hours telling everybody how we create our own reality. And then he spent the second 4 hours blowing everybody's minds and freaking everybody out about how the reptoids have taken over the earth. Is there a weird sort of dichotomy going on there? We create our own reality, reptoids have taken over the earth. Create our own reality, reptoids. You are what you think, you create. Evil reptoids are here. Anyway, you get my point. Well, it's a sad state of affairs when people pay that much money to have the bejesus freaked out of them after being told they create their own reality. If that's the case, why were they even in the theater in the first place? It's weird. Anyway, this slide is out of order, but it does give you a sense of the wonderful magnificence of ancient cultures. This is a 10-foot high basalt, one of the hardest rocks that you can find in geology, carved with obsidian tools by the Olmec. And look at the Negroid features. Need I go on? That's not a Mesoamerican there. Anyway, we could go on and talk about David Hatcher Childress, who is a diffusionist archaeologist. How many people have seen Ancient Aliens? Okay, I'm sure you recognize that smiling face. David's my next door neighbor, so I've had a chance to compare notes with the good man and read his many books. He's written over 30 books. And he's come up with he supports an interesting theory that ancient man actually was in touch with one another, that ancient cultures didn't evolve and rise out of obscurity and out of a primitive state in an isolated manner. In other words, he say that ancient cultures knew about each other, had trade routes, and were connected. And I could do a whole talk just on that, and so could David, believe me. He could probably talk for a week on it or more. One of the things that's been really prevalent lately in the media is this particular image, made famous by Eric von Däniken as the Mayan king riding the rocket ship. Of course, back in 71 when he deciphered this, or 70 when he attempted to decipher it, we didn't know about 80% of the Mayan language. Since then, we've academics working with the Quiche Maya and the Chol Maya have deciphered the Mayan language, except for the names of the gods. There's too many T's, X's, P's, and L's for them to be able to pronounce the words. So we can't really say that we've deciphered the entire language, but about 95% of it we have. And one of the things that I find very curious is that the media keeps telling us that the Mayan calendar is going to end. How many people have heard that? The Mayan calendar is going to end. Oh, come on, be truthful. How many people have heard the Mayan calendar is going to end, the world's going to end, and we're all going to die? Yeah, we've all heard it. You guys are chicken out there. You think I'm going to pick on you, and I will if I'm taking notes here. Okay, you, and you. I know you know that. All right, folks, first of all, there are 17 Mayan calendars. None of them end. The Mayan predicted dates and events all the way out to the year 5200. How many people knew that? Oh, good. Okay. Well, this is going to be the end of the long count cycle of 26,000 years, the first time it's happened in 26,000 years. The solar system has gone completely around the galaxy and crossed over the ecliptic of the galaxy. It's also a new cycle for the Baktun and the Katun, which is a 52.5-year cycle and a 3,200-year cycle. The three of these cycles have never turned over at the same time in this, well, actually the last two worlds. And this is going to be a pretty interesting year, I think. Don Alejandro, a Quiche Maya timekeeper from Guatemala, came up to Sedona, and I happened to go see him because it's very rare for him to get out of Guatemala. And one thing stuck with me with his talk, and he said that, you white boys think you got this whole Mayan thing figured out. Well, you don't know diddly, okay? This cycle is ending. It could happen now. It could have happened yesterday. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen in 2 weeks. It could happen in 2013. We are in a time of radical change. He said, but all that doesn't matter. The one thing that matters is if one day you wake up and the sun doesn't rise and it's dark, lock your doors, shut your windows, put your blinds on your windows, and no matter who comes to the door, don't let them in. Now, that really struck a chord with me because grandfather Martin Goshwe Somo, who is the last traditional Hopi elder, told me the same thing about 5 years prior to that. He said, if one day the sun doesn't come up, lock all your doors and don't let anybody in. Doesn't matter who they say they are, don't let them in. So I find it very interesting that two elders from divergent cultures should have the same admonition for all of us to be aware of. Of course, we also know about Viracocha, which is the return of the true white brother in the Hopi version. Also the return of Quetzalcoatl in the Mesoamerican version. Viracocha is a South American form of the white-skinned feathered plumed serpent form. So we're in interesting times. There's no two ways about it. And there's lots of evidence that we've been visited by something. I'm sure everybody, most of you have seen this image. I love the symbols there on the far right that are depicted. They kind of look like the balsa wood symbols from Roswell, right? Roswell, woo! I love it. We'll talk about Roswell later. Of course, we have the Dropa. These are evidences, evidence that perhaps we were visited at some time in the ancient past by non-human entities that left some sort of genetic footprint. The controversial Dropa story is very interesting. The figures there on the upper right are supposedly the last two surviving Dropa, and below them are the Dropa stones that disappeared into Russia and supposedly are like a library of the Dropa knowledge that the Russians ended up with. I don't have time to digress too far into many of these slides. Here's an interesting slide that may be the earliest depiction of a UFO that we can actually ascribe an actual author and event to. This is from the 11th century in Europe. We've got tons of other images all through the Renaissance and medieval times. I'm sure all of us at one point or another have seen these symbols that, art scholars and art historians, they say, well, this is illumination, God illuminating Mary or God illuminating Jesus. But if you look at some of them, they have scientific principles that don't, that could not have been known by medieval man, including straight light beams of coherent light, like a laser. These images there's a lot of them if you look into the literature. I love this one, the Roman coin with the saucer flying on it. Anybody ever seen these? Show of hands. I recently read an article at UFO Iconoclast by Rich Reynolds that stated there is no hard physical evidence that primitive man ever saw UFOs. These are from 1,500 years ago from the woodland culture, the Mississippian culture, in the upper Ohio River Valley. These are objects made out of hematite that show extremely accurate depictions of UFO craft and emitters, which are the holes around the craft that are used to project plasma out into the atmosphere to control the craft. Ray Stanford, one of my mentors, has one of the largest collections of these objects. And it's interesting that this is the start of an Indian game called Chunky, which is like a cross between shuffleboard and bowling. By the time that the white man arrived, these objects had de-evolved into almost bowling ball shapes. Here's an example of them, just to give you a sense of scale and show you the top and bottom. These objects are inexplicable. How could ancient Americans have come up with this particular design unless they were copying something? Okay? Here is a good example of the progression of these objects. You have the most ancient objects being very detailed with a cupola on top and a cupola on the bottom with the emitters. And as they progress through time, they slowly get rounded out and they slowly become more like this. The Indians would take these objects and roll them down a path to try to get close to the end of a staff, and then later try to knock down standing sticks like bowling. Now, I find that very intriguing, that they would come up with this style of play, if you will, and it's all stemming from these very, very detailed flying saucer images. So, I mean, I could really digress a lot here just on this particular subject alone. Anyway, as the explorers arrived in the New World, we do have some very interesting early reports, including a report on Columbus's voyage of strange lights seen in the sky. And This may be the earliest known UFO photo. Of course, it is controversial. Some people say it's some sort of, artifact in the film. But we do get into some very interesting pre-Kenneth Arnold sighting waves. Of course, the great 1887 airship wave or 1897 airship wave is worthy of note. Tens of thousands of people saw great airships prior to the invention of the Zeppelin, or solid, heavier than air blimps, if you will, crossing from west to east across the United States. There are many, many newspaper articles that talk about these forms, and I actually was the one that came up with the first Colorado great airship sighting that was reported in 1897 over Grand Junction, Colorado. I found a small article in a local Buena Vista newspaper. Well, the stories have gotten pretty grandiose, including the Aurora, Texas story, where one of these objects supposedly crashed into a windmill, and the aliens died and were buried in the Aurora Cemetery, etc., etc. Here's a stylized view of one of the sightings. One of the things that I found interesting is right when these great airships were flying around the Midwest and possibly over the Rocky Mountains, this guy showed up in Denver. He healed over 100,000 people over a 6-month period. People lined up for 2 miles outside of the house he was staying at to be healed by Francis Slaughter. How many people have heard of Francis Slaughter? Oh, I didn't think so. Look that name up and do a little research. You'll be amazed. So I look at correlations. When something shows up in the air, I look at what's going on in the culture and in the communities around the sighting. And that's something that all of you as potential investigators should be aware of in your investigative process. Well, here we have, this guy maybe single-handedly helped topple the Victorian age. Of course, he's a pretty spooky dude. This is Aleister Crowley, not Crowley. Crowley if you think him foully, Crowley if you think he's holy, is how he used to say it. But Aleister Crowley was a high magus in the Golden Dawn ritual, hermetic, magical tradition. And one of the rituals that he did in 1919 was called the Alamantra working, which he did when he was visiting New York. He went out to Montauk, interestingly enough, and did a very, very complicated ritual over a period of days. And the entity that he said showed up, he called Lamb. And Lamb, interestingly enough, is probably our first depiction of, ta-da, this little guy's great-great-grandfather. Okay? And what Crowley did, because when he showed this picture to his magical buddies, he had the eyes as these big almond-shaped eyes, and they freaked out and said, nobody will ever believe this. So he gave it human eyes just to make it more believable. Although the original eyes were large almond-shaped eyes, as you can see above these eyes here. I find it very interesting that this is, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but this could be our earliest known artistic depiction of what we now refer to as a gray. I'll move on. Religious miracles. You gotta love them. 3 little kids, including Sister Lucia, who survived all the way up until just a few years ago as a nun in the Catholic Church. Of course, we all know the miracle of Fatima occurred, I think, over a 5-month period, if I'm not mistaken. She showed up on the 17th of the month, 5 months in a row. The first time she showed up was to the 3 kids. By the time word got out, and each month she would show up, by the 5th month there were 70,000 people watching. That photograph up in the upper right-hand corner is a very rare photograph of the actual sun dancing in the sky. Now, if something like that happened today, it'd be a UFO event. Correct me if I'm wrong. Right? Nobody's correcting me. Okay. Can I get a... never mind. All right, so we'll go on. I could talk about religious miracles and their tie to ufology. I could do a whole talk just on that. This is one of my favorites. How many people know about the Coptic Church and the sightings at Zaytun in 1966? Anybody know about this particular event? These are real photographs of what they thought was the Virgin Mary hovering over the Coptic Church, complete with these birds of peace that were flying around. here. I don't have my pointer on me. It's somewhere. I think it's in my my briefcase. But this event is worthy of your awareness, and I do invite you to look at the many photographs and films that were taken of Zaytun. I would think that an event like this could be equated to some sort of UFO event. I mean, it's unidentified, right? It's flying, and it seems to have plasma around it, which to me is a litmus test for a real UFO. Here's a cross-section of a flying saucer almost 40 years before the term was coined for Kenneth Arnold by reporters who interviewed him when he landed on that infamous day in June 1947. I won't bore you with the Kenneth Arnold event. I'm sure if any of you have listened to a speaker up here, you've probably heard that story a few times. And I guess you don't have my typeface there. I had some spooky typeface, and that says nighttime visitors are these. Is this the birthplace of abduction? Of course, these images here are of incubus and succubus. Incubus is the male form that seems to visit women during the Middle Ages, and succubus is the female form. Of course, the suck part should give you a clue. The succubus is the female form that visits men during the Middle Ages. I find it very interesting that you should have abduction-like phenomena mentioned in medieval accounts. And also at the bottom is the Celtic version of abductions, where the elfin people or the elementals would come and steal a healthy baby, an infant, and replace it with a wooden baby, or even in some cases a different baby that was sickly and sometimes didn't survive. And if it did survive, it was shunned by the village. This could be considered a precursor to the abduction phenomena, as I'm sure some of you out there are quite aware of. We do have vestiges of these attendant phenomena found all the way back into the historic and prehistoric record. I'm just reminding you that we have had these connections to the unknown for quite some time, in quite a number of years. Of course, the first abduction account that was widely publicized, besides Ezekiel, is in the modern era, is the Betty and Barney Hill case. Of course, what you don't know is that there was a military base right nearby, and most people aren't aware that they described the uniforms worn by the aliens as looking like Nazi officers. Find that kind of intriguing. We could digress there, but I'm moving along. Anybody hear how Roger's doing? He has, I think he's been in the hospital. This is Roger Lear on the bottom left-hand corner, one of our alien implant experts. Of course, he's a podiatrist. I'm not sure what feet have to do with this, maybe inches, but Roger has been working tirelessly for at least 20 years, initially with Daryl Sims here, in having these implants removed and having them studied. Now, I find it interesting that this type of technology that's fairly large could be considered quite primitive, even by our technological standards. We have nanotechnology that can do all this in micrometers, not in millimeters. So if anybody knows of any irrefutable evidence that one of these objects is of extraterrestrial origin, please let me know. I'll bet you $100 right now that you can't. Any takers? All right. Well, here he is, my little buddy. He doesn't like me because I don't believe in him. I think we're the aliens, right? Yeah, he's not going to talk. I'll get him to say something later. That's not my prop, by the way. Thank you for supplying him. Well, the media has really started force-feeding us with these images. They get very cacophonous at times. One of my favorite insurance policy potentials here is alien abduction insurance. You can get alien abduction insurance. Did you know that? There is a company underwriting policies, and they will pay off if you can prove that you've been abducted by an alien. I do like the, the marketing of the tinfoil hat, which I I've been accused of wearing every now and then, but let me show you. There ain't no tinfoil in there, folks. Okay. All right. Hey, anybody out there believe in psychokinesis? Do you even know what psychokinesis is? The ability to move an object with your mind. How many people believe that that is a possibility? Raise my hand. Whoa! All right. I almost had a psychic wife, but she left before we met. This is one of my favorite abduction accounts. You'd think a guy that investigated one of the hottest spots in America for paranormal events would have some abduction accounts, right? If I had a stack of all the stories that I was told, that grandma told us, or my next door neighbor, or my dad, or whatever, with no viable data to back it up, a date, a time, a location, some sort of description of the event, etc., I'd have a stack of reports this high, literally. I'm not making that up. It'd be a good 3 feet high. I actually only have a stack of reports this high because I need 10 points of solid data in order for it to make my log. Well, one of 4 abduction claims out of all these cases was this following account. And now we get into special effects. There we go. This is an abduction account with a twist. The head of Mensa, the Smart People's Club in Kansas, moved to the San Luis Valley and became a follower of Maharaji, if I remember his name correctly, who was a guru in the Vedic tradition. And he moved to Cuesta, New Mexico. His name was Norman Dunsmore. And he woke up one night and felt himself paralyzed by a beam of light that sucked him up through his house, through the wall, up into a ship. This happened in the late 80s, 89 or 90. I found out about him through his son, who told me about his account and convinced his dad. It took quite a number of months for him to open up and agree to talk to me. Those are the kind of cases that I seem to like the best, when I don't have to read it in a newspaper account and then do follow-up work. It's when I have to go and pull the account out of somebody. This was one of those types of cases. Well, Norman said that he was popped up into this ship, and he was instantly aware that he was looking at advanced technology. Well, the first thing he thought, thinking of Maharaji, his guru, is that he would love to build him a temple, and he wondered if this technology could show him gold. Instantly, the ship zipped across the prairie and illuminated in the ground about 1,000 feet below him a lost Spanish treasure. And then he thought, I wonder if it can show me some real gold that's been undiscovered. And it showed him an undiscovered gold vein in Coyote Canyon on the other side of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Then it showed him what he thinks is the 1888 lost Wells Fargo robbery hoard. And then it showed him another, what he thought was a Spanish treasure. He spent the last 15 or so years wrangling treasure rights for these locations and trying to figure out where they were. He was 1,000 feet in the air, and it was difficult for him to ID the exact spots on the ground traveling in his pickup truck. He's identified the spots, and he's wrangling treasure rights. There are treasure rights in Colorado. Someone could show up at your house in Colorado and say, I have the treasure rights, and I want to dig underneath your house, believe it or not. And so he's attempting to locate these treasures. So far, no luck. But I find it very interesting. One of my 4 abduction claims in 20 years has a gold kind of element to it. Anyway, I digress, as usual. Well, is there a crypto connection to UFOs? I think so. I think Bigfoot sightings are very, very intriguing just on their own. But when you factor in some of the cases that are out there on the record of Bigfoots in conjunction with UFOs, you have a very interesting kind of pea soup of reports of cases. This is a Thunderbird, depiction of a Thunderbird, which is the only paranormal phenomena that is mutually agreed upon by all Native Americans in North America. I mean, Native Americans are very standalone in their belief systems, but the one thing that's cross-cultural with them is the belief in the Thunderbird. The Thunderbird, of course, is a flying object, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. And we do have some interesting reports over the years of these types of flying creatures, including that photograph in the background from New Guinea of the, I forget, it's got some weird native name. They glow in the dark. So I've had several reports of thunderbirds in my years in the San Luis Valley. They're normally depicted as huge, oversized crows or ravens soaring in the air. I find the crypto connection very intriguing, especially Bigfoot. One of my favorite cases is the Clearview case, which I'll talk about in a minute. This is Hoyt Velarde. He's a Hickory Apache that lives in Dulce, New Mexico. I've known Hoyt for quite a number of years. He personally has investigated over 100 claims of Bigfoot sightings. He was the director of, or the head of the Department of Public Safety, DPS, on the Hickory Apache Reservation. And some of you may have heard of Gabe Valdez. Gabe and Hoyt were the ones that investigated the Manuel Gomez cattle mutilation cases in Dulce in the late 70s. I find that some of our most telling clues may be found in the traditions of Native Americans, and I'm going to cover that information later. I just want to zip along here so we don't run out of time like I did in San Jose. The Clearview case, in a nutshell, is one of the most mind-blowing cases I've ever heard of. In 78 and 79, a rancher family in Colorado near the Air Force Academy started experiencing cattle mutilations. They started seeing Bigfoots. They would see weird blinking boxes that would be in trees. The guy drive down his road to the mailbox and see this weird blinking box. On the way back, he'd come back and it would be gone. They had strange, the TV would come on and it wasn't even plugged in. Strange messages would come out. It's a very interesting case. It was investigated by Leo Sprinkle, Tom Adams, David Perkins, and later was covered in one of Timothy Good's books. And the one incident that totally blows my mind is one day after a very riveting Bigfoot sighting, a saucer landed in broad daylight on their ranch. Now we're talking about a ranch that overlooks the Air Force Academy, okay, in Colorado, just north of Colorado Springs. They were stunned. This thing came down, and what came out? Not one of these little guys or a couple, but Air Force officers. So they thought, oh, geez, thank God. They thought, it was, the day the earth stood still. It's Klaatu coming out to, say, what's the secret password? Was it something Bariktu or something? Anyway, these Air Force officers come out and they talk to the rancher and his wife and they say, look, it's okay. I know you've had these cattle deaths, these Bigfoot, you've seen these Bigfoot, but don't worry about the Bigfoot. We control them. And he said, look over there. And they turned around, there's a Bigfoot standing under one of their trees. And it's holding one of the blinking boxes that he saw in the trees. And the Air Force officer had this weird kind of Buck Rogers kind of belt on and said, look, we control him. Look, and he hit a button and the Bigfoot kind of twitched out and fell on the ground. And he said, see, watch. And he hits the button again, the Bigfoot comes to his senses, stands up, and then keeps holding the box. And so they got aboard their saucer and left. I mean, I'm cutting to the chase with the story here, but kind of makes you wonder, right? How about Stan Gordon's case in Pennsylvania? Anybody hear of the Bigfoot with the glowing ball of light and the guy fired at it and the rifle went through the object in the Bigfoot? Anybody familiar with that case? Definitely look it up. Mysterious Pennsylvania is a book that I recommend. Stan Gordon is a real trooper. He's like me. He doesn't go around promoting himself and creating a cult of personality around his work. He's the real, gung-ho trench guy in the trenches. I do urge you to look up information on the Clearview case, one of my favorites. Well, we're going to talk about the cows here just briefly. Many of you may be aware of my long-time inadvertent fascination with mutilated livestock. The Ancient Mariner had an albatross around his neck. I've got a dead, stinking, necrotic cow around mine. I've investigated over 200 cases. We'll talk about the cattle thing a little later if you can stomach it. But there does seem to be some sort of connection between the cattle mutilation phenomenon, and UFOs. This is a lamp that you can buy, and I've been trying to find one on eBay, and they're pretty hard to find, but it definitely would look good on my desk, let me tell you. The culture, though, is playing around with us, okay? The beef industry is very powerful, and we're going to talk about that later with the cattle mutilation phenomenon, but I've investigated over 200 cases personally, and out of those, 40 of them freak me out, if you will, mildly and then severely. Here's an example of what predators or scavengers can do to an animal. See the one on the upper right? Now, if that's not a perfect circle, I don't know what is. I personally saw magpies do that to this animal. The one on the upper left, you see the white areas where there's obvious cuts there? Psych. I did it. That's where I got my samples. The cases on the bottom were also done by scavengers. Anytime the media picks up on a cattle mutilation story, everybody is alerted, and untrained amateur eyes, when they see a dead cow in the field, if they see any missing organs, they immediately assume it's a cattle mutilation, and you begin a process of collective delusion. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Here's examples of some real cases. I don't want to digress too far. This one on the upper right was a recent case investigated by Chuck Zukowski down near Trinidad. Well, let's move on to more easily digestible subjects here. Is there a connection between crop circles and UFOs? Well, there are stories all the way back to the reign of King James, when the villagers petitioned him about strangely slain livestock and how their fields were being mowed. Well, here's the mowing devil. Hey, if you can't figure out what it is, blame it on the devil, right? Christianity has had a way of running roughshod over our belief systems for so long. It's still to this day, if you can't figure it out, and you wear one of those little Bibles on your belt, let's blame it on Satan. Well, how about this? Crop circles are all fine and dandy. We know there's hoaxers out there, all of us, and if you don't, you should. This kind of circle really intrigues me. This is less than 1/4 of an inch of ice with a perfect circle inscribed into it. This, to me, is more anomalous than this. Well, not this, but this is a Tully saucer nest in Australia. I'm talking about other formations. Barbary Castle from '92, I think, may be real. But these formations, aren't they just wonderfully sublime, and they just make you go, ah. But tell me the one on the upper right was done by aliens. Okay, there's something wrong with that picture, at least in my book. Humans can do this. In fact, these are 4 circles that we know were done by humans. I hate to be the bearer of bad news to all you crop circle enthusiasts, but humans are very creative, and with teams of people planned for months, they can pull something like this off. One of my favorite stories, however, is Team Satan doing a circle in Wilshire, slaving away all night, barely had enough time to get the thing done. They left somebody behind to watch out and see who would first see it, and much to his surprise, as it got light, he looked in the field next to the hoax crop circle, and there was a brand new fresh crop circle that had been formed right when they were doing theirs. And nobody saw or heard a thing. This is a true story. Matthew Williams, who you'll find mention of online, tells the story. And John Lundgren has told the story. Team Satan is one of our performance art teams that produce these wonderful works of art. Of course, the Oliver Castle film. How many here have seen this? All right, good. We have a few. Well, check it out. It repeats. Notice the lights go around in a circle, and right below it, a crop circle forms. Now, initially, this was really big news among the paranormal crowd. And then all of a sudden, it was found out that the guy that came forward with this film was a video expert. So instantly, all the debunkers and skeptics said, well, it's obviously a hoax. And so it's been dismissed for many years, but now people are starting to come back and re-looking at this footage and saying, well, there's certain things about this that you can't explain, including
The fact that the formation was not there the day before and that it was recorded, and they know when it was recorded, this footage, on the supposed night that it was created. So there's a possibility that this could be real footage of a crop circle being formed by unidentified flying lights. Well, there's a potential connection there. Of course, aliens didn't do these. I like the Hello Kitty on the lower right. That's my favorite. Actually, Team Satan was hired by I think Nissan, the car company, to do a perfect, huge 300-foot Nissan minivan down in New Zealand. And if you look at it, it looks like a photograph of a minivan. If you look at it from the air, it's really amazing artwork. Well, this one is the real deal, folks. This one only survived a few hours. The farmer went out in Wilshire, saw this thing, and was so freaked out by it, he had instantly he cut all the grass. What makes this formation interesting is these parts of the formation are woven at knee level. In other words, the stalks grew up and then they were woven. We do have one set of footage taken by Bert Janssen that shows the very end of the mowing process of the magic basket. I'm not saying crop circles aren't real, but I'm saying most of them are man-made. There is something going on. I had the good fortune of spending a weekend with Lawrence Rockefeller, just just serendipity, and he was very, very fascinated by the crop circle phenomenon. And his right-hand man, George Lamb, retired, and Henry Diamond, his new, high-powered lawyer. I guess if you're a billionaire, you need probably a really high-powered lawyer. He called me up one day and told me he was sending me a big fatty check, which I really appreciated. But he said, Chris, you've spent some time with Lawrence, could you tell me why he is so fascinated by crop circles? You and I both know that these are being done by British intelligence from space. I said, we do? The first thing I said was, well, wait a minute. How is that possible? What about atmospheric lensing? How do you pulse microwaves or something down through the atmosphere and be able to get such, intricate designs? He goes, oh, they figured that out. They have the computing power to figure all that out. And I said, that's news to me. So if a billionaire is interested in the crop circle phenomenon and his right-hand man is trying to discount it by saying British intelligence is doing it from space, you figure this is something that's worthy of investigation. So I do applaud the hard work of crop circle researchers, but it's almost impossible now to separate the wheat from the chaff, pardon the pun. Some good work has been done by Nancy Talbot's BLT research team. That's Lawrence Levengood, or W.C. Levengood, Lefty as we call him, up in the upper left-hand corner. He's the one that came up with the theory that expulsion cavities are produced by high heat events that blow the moisture out through parts of the nodal points on the stalk of these affected crops, and that's how you can tell a real crop circle from a fake one. Unfortunately, he found expulsion cavities in a known hoax circle, so it kind of makes you wonder whether that is a really good, reliable test and program of research to determine fake from real. Well, Nancy has also now gone on to be a special destiny person. She gets beamed by strange beams of lights. Crop circles form outside the window of the house she stays in when she goes and investigates. Robert Vanderboker. Anybody hear that name? This guy is amazing. Okay. I'm pretty skeptical about a lot of things, but when I really look at the evidence that she has amassed over 12, 13 years of this very talented individual, he gives Uri Geller, Chris Angel, David Copperfield, he's as good, if not better, than these guys. He's able to produce unbelievable images on digital cameras with his mind. He takes your camera and he goes, and then he hands it to you, and there's a picture of your dead grandma. Or there's a picture of 3 monkeys playing classical instruments. Or there's a picture that, after many months of research, they find that it's actually very similar to a picture of a German army officer marching down the road, but it's not taken from a known picture. It's like in between the sequence of pictures. Robert Vanderboker, I urge everybody to look up that case. I'm still scratching my head over that. And Nancy has been totally taken in by it, I might add. God bless her. She's such a trooper. Well, one of my favorite theories about UFOs is that they're actually sub-oceanic. How many people have read Invisible Residents by Ivan T. Sanderson? Oh my God, you guys are missing out. You've got to get a copy of that book. It is one of the most important books, in my estimation, in the study of UFOs. He looks at the history of reports as UFOs are related to water. Many, a sizable percentage of UFO reports are in conjunction with bodies of water. So we may be dealing with something possibly utilizing the 98% of the oceans that we have not explored. Okay, well, now we're getting into some questionable territory here, and that's how your culture impacts your belief system. Folks, culture is not your friend. Terence McKenna, one of my all-time favorite influences, Mr. Mushroom, used that axiom for many years. He said, if the culture believes it, automatically assume the opposite. Well, I don't know if aliens backed Clinton. I don't know how he won in 98, but he did. Or was it 90? Well, he won in 92, and then I'm talking about his second term. Anyway, 96, there we go. I don't know how he won, but he did. The media, everybody forgets that we have to communicate these things to each other, right? And there is a very cut-to-the-chase form of this called television. And the media does play a very, I think, important role in spreading belief systems and influencing people and programming their belief around these subjects. And of course, in 1992, what happened? What went into production in 1992? You got it, baby. You get the gold star. The X-Files. As soon as the X-Files came on TV, we seemed to have an explosion of interest in UFOs, government conspiracies, and related topics that later devolved into some pretty interesting storylines. My favorite storyline from an X-Files episode was the the couple getting abducted by a military psyops team on a deserted roadway, and they're dressed up as aliens, and they freeze them in their seats and they abduct them. Then all of a sudden a real ship comes down, this monstrous alien, like out of a Roy Harryhausen sci-fi movie, comes out and abducts the abductors. This is one of my favorite episodes. If you see that one, you'll know what I mean. Well, something definitely happened in 92. This is when I first was exposed to real-life X-File events. So this particular date has kind of a warm place, or I don't know if it's a warm place, but has a place in my heart. Hey, I want to believe, okay? I want to believe that this little guy thinks we're important enough to come solve all our problems, create world peace, feed the poor, cure the sick. Ain't going to happen. We're on our own. I hate to be the one to tell you. There's nothing out there that's going to come save us. Not your faith, not your belief. Only your vote is going to save you. And now with Diebold voting machines, even that's in question. Pardon me while I get a little cynical. Well, UFOs have been with us for a long time, okay? There's been a pop culture belief in aliens all the way back into, the Kenneth Arnold days in the 40s and 50s. And usually the images are a little terrifying. The early images are like monster-type images, and there's this whole feeling of fear and programming, this impotence into culture as it relates to aliens. These little guys always kind of scared me. I remember seeing this Astounding Stories cover when I was a kid, and I thought, man, if I had eyes like that, and that thing came at me, I'd just poke it in the eye, That might set it back a couple of feet. But here's the opposite of that. It's like, you know, it goes from evil aliens to E.T. Be good, Elliot, be good. Well, if that thing came at me, all you need to do is karate chop it in the neck, and you know, it's like it's all over. You know, sorry, E.T., but you don't look very realistic to me. This is something that I've been battling with ever since I got involved in this whole field of study, and that is the alien stomp. The extraterrestrial hypothesis is the single most obvious thing that is stamped on creative thinking and out-of-the-box thinking in the study of the paranormal and UFOs in particular. And I don't want to tell you not to believe in aliens, but I would really like it if you would open your minds enough to consider other possibilities, which we're going to start talking about. Okay? The ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, has done more to stamp on and snuff out of-the-box creative thinking in this field than any other thing besides your disbelieving siblings, aunts, uncles, neighbors. Okay, this single thing, the ETH, is responsible for programming cultural belief in aliens. And boy, I tell you, it gets really weird after a while. How many people have been to Roswell? Okay, when you went to Roswell, wasn't it interesting? You got about 100 miles away and you stopped to get gas and you noticed little alien tchotchkes on the counter. And then you go to the next town and you see bigger alien tchotchkes and maybe some alien cups. And then as you get closer, there's posters of aliens. And as you get a little closer, there's books and stickers and coffee mugs and shot glasses. And it's like, as soon as you get all the way into Roswell, the one time I went, I had to bring a bunch of calamine lotion because I was itching in places I couldn't scratch from all these images. I found a country and western clothing store with alien mannequins dressed up as cowboys. It was very frightening, believe me. And I left my favorite pillow in the motel room. Well, these types of images have done more to kind of make us seem foolish to the rest of the disbelieving population than probably anything else. Alien tchotchkes, I think, are really anathema to what we're seriously trying to do. But this is an ancient subject. We've had lots of evidence over the years to suggest that something non-human and intelligent is visiting us. And I totally agree with that, but I think that we're dealing with something that's a little bit more closed system. In other words, we are in a closed system spinning in space. Now, I know all you New Agers out there, oh, well, we're connected to the cosmos. Nothing is a closed system. We're all connected. Yeah, you're right, but physically, in terms of physical reality, we are a self-contained biosphere spinning in space with incredible biodiversity on this planet. Okay? And I think what we'll do now is, I think this is where I take my little break. I'm not sure. I kind of switched this up a little bit. Yeah, well, this is some examples of some stuff that I did in my own research. Let's go ahead and take a quick break. Everybody okay, or should we take a little break, or do? Okay, let's do a little break. Any questions before we take a break here? Anybody have a question, real quick? Let's open it up. I've answered all the. We're gonna do a Q&A after. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Just wondered. Yeah. There's one here. Yeah. The model. Yeah. The feathered serpent. Yes. Was that an actual person that was given that title, or a mythological? It depends on how you want to define that. He was described as an actual person, but he appears in a mythological context. So. Why call him a feathered serpent? Possibly because he flew. I don't know. You know, he's also considered as a. If you look at the Quetzal feather and the Quetzal bird, he's also associated with that. So there's some kind of indication of flight there. When we come back, we're going to talk about how to take this whole line of thinking forward, what we can do to identify areas of real specific interest in terms of our research and investigation. So don't go away. Let's come back, and I'll be at my table here for about 5 minutes, and then we'll continue. Anyway, okay, we're back.
Thank you very much for those of you that haven't shattered your reality view and you've decided to stick it out and listen to what else this crazy trickster guy has to say. For many years, I've investigated the mysterious San Luis Valley in south central Colorado, north central New Mexico. I've worked with lots of sky watchers. I have a whole network of sky watchers. I'm currently starting a surveillance camera project, 7 high-tech surveillance cameras operated remotely over the internet, all coordinated with quadrant data. When an event occurs, all the cameras will be synchronized to triangulate on a particular aerial event. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. If I had time, I could get the image up on the screen and woo you with real-time control from 500 miles away of the camera setup. But one thing I do want to, confess, for lack of a better term, I was exposed to the San Luis Valley very early on with the Snippy the Horse case, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But I initially set out to write an article when people were reporting UFO sightings in November of '92. I was a writer for my local newspaper, and coming from Manhattan many years, I have a bit of a cynical approach on life, like most New Yorkers do. And I wanted to set out and debunk this whole thing and do a tongue-in-cheek article, the kind of article that all of us hate to read, right? The Michael Shermers, the James Randi type approach. And I had 2 weeks before I had to turn my article in, and at the end of the 2 weeks when I did intensive research, I was a true believer. Aliens were coming here, they were mutilating our cattle, they were flying ships, they were flying rings around our Air Force, and I was all convinced that this was something that really needed to be dug into. I'm getting ahead of myself. We have lots of types of different unexplicable or inexplicable phenomena in the San Luis Valley, including those little kind of thingies you see down in the corner. This is not an over-the-shoulder reflection in the photograph. This particular corner has this kind of strange reputation of being where these undulating forms are seen traveling across the road at all times of the day or night. And they appear to be real and manifest, if you will, in this reality, but they're not quite there. People drive right through them and they don't run them over or anything. And I happened to have a group of folks that wanted me to take them around the valley, and I had stopped at this corner to tell them about these prairie dragons, as I called them. And this woman took a series of photographs of me talking, and sure enough, in one of the photographs, these 2 weird forms on the lower right-hand side showed up. I don't know why I have this particular picture in this place in the talk, but maybe I'm a special destiny person. I have identified a 100-yard circle in the Baca Grande development that seems to be the epicenter of a lot of our activity in the north end of the valley. This particular picture was taken at about 5 below zero. There were no bugs. There was no particulate matter in the air. This is one of 5 shots that showed something unusual. And Carol Dennis in the purple jacket there saw this thing appear over my head and said, "Quick, take a picture." And by the time the picture was taken by the photographer, the object had moved to the left there. I call it the disco ball, for lack of a better description. Now, orbs, of course, we all know, digital photography has produced these new kind of forms that, for the most part, I think are small bits of particulate matter hanging in the air that are illuminated by a flash and captured as some sort of anomaly on a digital image. Well, this particular image was of a flying martini olive. And I'm asking Carol, what is a flying martini olive doing here with this little wiggling worm that was very visible and shooting all around us as we were standing there? And here's a close-up of the martini olive, for lack of a better term. And here's another picture of it as it starts to travel away from us. And we could see this with our unaided vision. You can't really see it here, but there's all these other objects that did not show up in any other photographs. And this wiggling worm form, which is very visible to all of us present, here's a close-up of it here. You'll see another tigle, as the Tibetans call these objects.
Other cultures have been seeing these for hundreds of years. The Tibetans have actually named them and rate them in terms of, they have a classification for them. I have written a couple of books in the last, since 2008. The Mysterious Secrets of the Mysterious Valley is kind of a blow-by-blow description of what it's like to be a doubting Thomas, and going through a very intense investigative and research process. And at the end of my first two books, people said, well, Chris, you lay out these hundreds of sighting events, but you never come up with any conclusions. So back a couple of years ago, I finally boiled all my theories down into a theory that a lot of people are not very comfortable with, and that is that there's some sort of tricksterish type mechanism that seems to tie together divergent paranormal phenomena. And I've written a book called Stalking the Tricksters, which lays out a new definition or a redefinition of the trickster archetype. Now, obviously I have a whole talk just on that subject. I will talk about the trickster briefly towards the end if we have time. One of the things that, oh, here we go, this is where we were supposed to take our break. One of the things that really interests me is the whole idea of a hotspot region. I have come to the conclusion that there are certain areas on our planet that have more activity and a variety of activity than most other places. I call these hotspot regions. And one of the things that I found out is that these hotspot regions, they don't really vary very much. They're like a haunted site. They're fairly predictable. So we're going to talk about hotspot regions. We're going to talk about Native American traditions as it relates to hotspot regions. Talk about the whole concept of subcultural belief systems as it relates to the paranormal. Look at some more examples of portal area phenomenon. Give you a quick historical overview of my particular petri dish, the San Luis Valley, and then look at some of the investigators and their theories who've come through before me. I stand on the shoulder of giants, by the way. Linda Moulton Howe, David Perkins, to a lesser extent Wendell Stevens, God rest his soul, Leo Sprinkle. Others came to the valley before me. And I'm going to talk briefly about their theories. We're going to look at the cattle mutilation phenomenon kind of through closed, kind of looking at the dead cows to our fingers here, and how this has, the birth of the phenomenon, how it is spread. And then we're going to look at the possible involvement, well, probable involvement of your tax dollars and exotic black technologies in these portal areas and other places. And then, if we have time, we'll look at the UFO phenomenon that I've been able to document in the valley. And then, if we have time again, we'll do some questions and answers. I think the veil is thin in these areas. Now, I use the analogy of taking a piece of taffy and you stretch it, and as you get to a certain point, holes start to appear in the taffy. Let's equate the taffy with reality, this three-dimensional reality with time as a fourth dimension that we all coexist in and have. We all have this kind of agreed upon view of reality, like this is a podium, this is a microphone, this is this crazy guy up talking to me. We all sort of agree to agree. We have a consensual reality. So if that's the case, and we do have places where reality is thin, or we have places where there's potential doorways in reality, I think these are the places that deserve the most attention as investigators. So here's a list of some of the areas that I've been able to identify as being hotspot areas. Of course, the San Luis Valley, the Bradshaw Ranch area around Sedona, the northwestern corner of White Sands. There's areas in Death Valley and the Mojave Desert. Of course, the Ohio River Valley, especially up in West Virginia and even all the way up into southwestern Pennsylvania. Parts of the Black Hills in South Dakota. Mount Shasta has often been cited as a place where you have a variety and intensity of unusual phenomena. The Uinta Basin, where the Hunt for the Skinwalker case, the Sherman Ranch case, which I was the first investigator on back in '96. And Indian reservations in general tend to be special areas. Now, one of the things that I've come up with is a formula to identify hotspot regions. With the help of Dr. Louis Turry, who kind of got me thinking in these directions, I've come up with a 5-point formula. If a site has ancient indigenous sacred sites and unusual geophysical properties, most specifically, the Earth has a magnetic field, and that field has relative field strength. If you have pockets of maximum field strength in close proximity to pockets of minimum field strength, it's like a topo map. When you see a cliff on a topo map, the lines are really close together. The same holds true for a visual representation of the Earth's magnetic field. And if you have maximum and minimum field strength in close proximity to one another, along the seams tend to be places where UFOs are most often seen. I find that very intriguing. And also other types of paranormal phenomena tend to cluster around these types of interaction zones. There should be, in this formula, a culture of unexplained regional events that is understood by the locals. There's legends, stories that tend to suggest that there are unusual things occurring, oftentimes in waves. And there's a government interest in the area. That is kind of the slam dunk part of the formula. In the San Luis Valley, we have the largest low-level flight training area for the military and the Air National Guard, just over the hill from the valley. And I'm going to give you a little brief tour of the San Luis Valley before we get too far down, for those of you who aren't aware of the valley. This is like a Google Earth map. The valley goes from the Taos, New Mexico area along the Rio Grande River, which goes here. And this mountain range is the longest continuous mountain range in North America. It's called the Sangre de Cristos. There's 7 14,000-foot mountains, including the only privately owned 14,000-foot mountains in the United States. Goes up the east side to the north, and along the western side is the San Juan Mountains. This is the largest alpine valley in the world. It sits at an average altitude of 7,300 feet. It is completely ringed by mountains, and it's radar invisible below 18,000 feet. A perfect aerial playground. Okay, let's kind of move along. Here's a more stylized view of the valley to give you a little better idea. Again, this is about the border area between Colorado in the north and New Mexico in the south. The official San Luis Valley is only the Colorado portion. My petri dish, I consider this entire area that goes down into northern New Mexico, which is not officially known as the San Luis Valley. We're going to take a real quick tour here. The Sangre de Cristos are a very, very magical, just amazing mountain range. Again, the longest continuous mountain range in North America. Here's a view from 39,000 feet. The Wet Mountain Valley is to the east. This is all the La Vida military operations area over here. We even rent out airspace to the Israelis, the Germans, and other countries to train their pilots. The San Luis Valley is on the western side. And one of the more amazing features of the valley is back here, right at in this area is the Great Sand Dunes National Monument. This is the most mysterious sand dune desert in the world. Geologists don't know how it got there. It's only 11,000 years old. It rises to heights of above 700 feet, and it's 49 square miles of the largest pile of almost pure silica on the planet. It's by many thousands of feet the highest sand dune desert in the world, and as I mentioned, geologists really don't know how it got there. I got to know the chief geologist out there after many years of sort of, saying hello. And finally one time I talked to him and said, look, you guys drilled down to the bottom of the dune field and took core samples from ancient trees that were covered up by the sand, and you're the ones that came up with the figure of 11,000 years. How could 49 square miles of sand, almost 750 feet high, be piled up in only 11,000 years? The story you tell people, I was a geology minor in college, it doesn't make sense. And he said, well, Chris, I'll confess, we don't know how it got there, but we have to tell people something. So, okay, moving right along. This is Blanca Peak. This is the sacred mountain of the east. This is the most important of the 4 sacred mountains according to the southwestern Indian tribe tradition. Blanca Peak is the place where all thought originates in their tradition. It's called Cisna Gini. And it also has a very interesting feature of the valley of the Rio Grande Gorge. This was a photograph sent to me by a pilot of an object that was flying off his wingtip, and he took a picture of it as he was flying along. But it also gives you a sense of the Rio Grande Gorge. I have reports of large doorways that open up near the top of the gorge, and a concrete pad allegedly comes out. Helicopters fly off. Pad goes back in, doors close, out of Dodge. This is one of the most remote areas of North America. Very, very few people live along this gorge. The oldest continuously inhabited dwellings arguably are at the Taos Pueblo at the extreme southern end of the valley. The Tewa Indians have incredible traditions that relate to Bigfoot, UFOs, and other paranormal phenomena, which we'll talk about. This is one of my favorite spots near the valley. This is called the Wheeler Geologic Area. And if I was a lot younger and still gobbling psilocybin mushrooms, this would probably be my favorite place to go trip out. It's very trippy. Notice the size of the guy here looking at the psilocybin mushroom formations there in the rocks. This is a very sacred spot to the Native Americans, especially the Ute Indians. Here is an illustration of the Four Corners. Of course, we have Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, all with the only contiguously shared spot, 4 states in the continent. The sacred mountain of the north is Hesperus. This is Blanca Peak, the San Luis Valley here. The Cisna Gini, or the place where all thought originates, the Black Sash Medicine Belt. Mount Taylor, outside of Albuquerque, is the sacred mountain of the south. And the second, probably most important of these 4 cardinal mountains is the San Francisco Peaks near Flagstaff, which are the highest mountains in Arizona. This is the place that the Hopi say that the sky kachinas come and go very regularly. And we have had quite a number of UFO sightings over the years in this area. One of my favorite anomalies in the San Luis Valley has nothing to do with UFOs. It has to do with a very large creek that flows down from the mountains on the southern side of the Great Sand Dunes and disappears down a hole. It's the only river or creek that we know of that has waves. You can actually, during the spring, surf down the river. It's a very interesting place. And the Sipapu, or the place of emergence for the northern Pueblo Indian tribes, is located at the San Luis Lakes, which is just about 7 miles out from where that river disappears into the ground. Now, according to some traditionals, this particular lake here is the place of emergence. And this brackish pond is like a side door. What do I mean by place of emergence? Well, the Indians in the Southwest believe that the earth has been cleansed 3 times prior to this world. We are in the 4th world. Prior to the cleansing of the earth, the Creator sends sky kachinas in a particular pattern. On 2 nights they go one way, the next night they go back. These sky kachinas indicate to the traditionals that the purification time is upon us. Well, generally when these signs are read properly by the traditional elders, at some point they say, we've reached that point where we should be getting ready for the cleansing. That point was reached in 1989, according to Grandfather Martin Gushwe Somo, who is the last real traditional elder of the Hopi, who I've become very, very friendly with. He actually lived with me for a week. He showed up for Thanksgiving dinner and wouldn't leave. It was interesting watching a 80-something-year-old traditional elder watch NFL football. Yeah, it was great. He'd say, touchdown! It was great. Woo! He'd do a little war dance every time somebody scored. He wasn't cheering for anybody in particular. He wanted everybody to win, Anyway, one of the things that they have is a very interesting traditional, kind of a how would I put this? It's really important in their tradition to be ready for the purification. When Creator gives them signs that it's going to be the end of a current world, this being the 4th, we've had the signs that the end of the 4th world is upon us. The Indians are told to go to the place of emergence, the Sipapu, or in the Zuni vernacular, the Sipapuna. And what they do is they go underground and are cared for by ant people. Is that you? You have anything to do with that? He looks kind of like an ant person, right? Just give him a couple feelers, like My Favorite Martian. So they go underground, they're cared for by the ant people, and they're given sustenance, they're protected. And then after the earth has cleansed itself, they are then given a sign, and they are allowed to come out of the Sipapu and then spread across the land and repopulate it. Now, the people that don't go down the Sipapu are in for a world of hurt. So the general kind of line of thinking here is that there's really very few, if anybody, left on the surface of the earth, and the people that come out of the Sipapu then are able to repopulate the surface of the earth. Now, according to this traditional knowledge, which is shared in some sense of the word around the world, there are very similar traditions cross-culturally around the world, obviously not with these specifics, but then they are able to repopulate the earth. We are at the end of the fourth world, according to the Hopi and the Maya. I told you about Don Alejandro's admonition and Martin's. As in the beginning of my talk, Colorado and the San Luis Valley has very interesting petroglyph images that indicate that there is an ancient tradition of knowledge and interaction with something from above coming down to the people, as indicated in this petroglyph. And oftentimes, at least in the Hopi tradition, these are called cloud dancers or sky people, star people. They ride flying seed pods, flying shields. In the eastern United States, they're called flying canoes. Flying shields is another term that's used. And this does give us, again, an indication of some sort of interaction with some sort of ancient high-tech presence. If I met up with something like that, walking home in some downtown LA alley, I'd probably be a little bit frightened. This is where I lived for quite a number of years. That's actually my house right there, that little dot, if you can see it. This is one of the highest mountains in North America. That was about 2.5 miles from my house. Just to give you an idea of how carnivorous appearing this location is. That was my first thought when I drove down the road for the first time on my first visit, is this place will eat me up and spit me out if I'm not careful. Well, I lasted 13 years. We have some very interesting anomalies that we can't explain. Archaeologists are still scratching their heads over the crestone beehives in the Baca Grande subdivision. These are dwellings, or for leprechauns or something. They're too small to live in. There's no evidence that fire was inside them. And even though they look like just a pile of stones, there's a perfect smooth dome on the inside. Now, one theory has been proposed that these are magnifying some sort of magnetic field to help germinate seeds. We know these dwellings have been there since the 1870s. They were here there when the first pioneers arrived. And there's 5 of them laid out in a kind of chaotic pattern. There's no real, it's not like in a 5-pointed star or anything. Just giving you a little idea of some of the weirdness. Of course, gold, as Coronado said, he said when asked about why, by the Indians, why are you so interested in gold? He says, because I have an affliction of the heart, and gold is the only cure. Well, the Spanish were the first arrivals to the San Luis Valley. Coronado, of course, didn't make it up there. Onate did. And, of course, they were looking for gold. But I find it very interesting. If you noticed on the map of the valley, Taos at the extreme southern end was the furthest north that the Spanish got officially in North America, in the Southwest. And I've done some research into this and tried to figure out why they didn't go further north. For 200 years, they stopped at Taos. They would not go up into the San Luis Valley. And the best explanation that I could really come up with was they were too frightened to. The Indians said, no, you don't want to go up there. This is not a place for us, let alone you. And what's interesting is the San Luis Valley is the only spot in North America where 3 regional groups of Indians overlap. The Great Plains Indians, the Great Basin Indians, and the Southwestern Indians. During the warmer months, all peacefully co-inhabited the hunting grounds there to do sacred vision quests and pay homage to the sacred mountain of the east, Cisna Gini, which is Blanca Peak. Well, one European that may have made it up to the San Luis Valley was Sister Marie Jesus Agreda, who, when the Conquistadore expedition that first visited up the valley in 1609, I think, or 1610, when they came back, a nun was on trial by the Inquisition in Spain for claiming that she was going to the New World and Christianizing Indians with her spirit body. The reason why they put her on trial was because some of the nuns were freaked out. She was levitating, surrounded by, in some accounts, a blue cloud, and in some sort of rapturous type state. Well, she was on trial when the conquistadores came back, and she was vindicated because of their story that the Indians had told them when they arrived up the Rio Grande that they had been visited by this woman described as very similar in appearance to Marie Jesus here, surrounded by a blue glow. When the Spanish came up the Rio Grande, in less than 2 years, they were able to establish 22 missions. It was the easiest conquest of any part of North America or South America in the entire incursion by the Spanish into the New World. And some revisionist historians lay the explanation of her visitation. Well, how come we're looking at Marie Jesus Agreda, who died in 1620? Why are we looking at her here? She is the least corrupted of the 12 incorruptible saints. This is an embalmed, a body that has not been embalmed, that has been lying in repose for 300 years. 2 complete scientific examinations of her have been performed. They were performed exactly 100 years apart. This is pretty amazing. If some of you heard my talk a number of years ago, I did talk about this particular saint or nun, and I went into a great bit of detail. My books also go into detail. Enter the Valley. Well, I've been digging for my first official documented UFO sighting in the San Luis Valley, and lo and behold, it was the first governor of the territory of New Mexico in 1777. He was asked to go, chase this really rascally Comanche chief named Quena Verde, who was coming down and raiding the area around Taos. So Juan Bautista de Anza set off with his army and chased him up into Colorado. And when he camped at the base of Cisna Gini, or the Blanca Peak, he noticed these weird, and his troops noticed these weird lights that were flying around the top of the mountain. And they heard this nauseatingly low vibration. It was a faint but very powerful sound that kind of made them queasy. And he noted this in his diary. So if I had to start my database somewhere, it would be this first official, semi-official account of unusual phenomena in 1777. San Antone Peak, I mentioned, is the largest freestanding mountain in North America. And the Tewa Pueblo has a very interesting tradition that Masaw, who is second in command to Creator, lives in this mountain. It's rife with lava tubes and caverns, and he normally is inside the mountain, but when he comes out, guess what he looks like? He's really big and tall, very bulky, covered with hair, and smells really bad. So I find it interesting that the 7 Bigfoot reports I had in the December and January of 94, 95 all occurred right at the base of this mountain in a week's time. I don't have time to go into details on that, but again, it is listed in my book. Here's some physical evidence of footprints in snow. That's a glove that's been set there to give you some sort of perspective on scale. I would hate to meet up with this guy, especially if he was trying to date my daughter. I think at the very least, dude, you got to do something about them toes. Like a nice pedicure would probably be wise. This is a depiction of a skinwalker. I got a whole chapter in my Stalking the Tricksters book about dark adepts like skinwalkers. These are, shall we say, very gifted black magicians that in the tradition of the Dene are said to be able to shapeshift into various animal forms, and even in some traditions into balls of light and fly across the desert. I have had quite a number of reports from the south end of the San Luis Valley, which is predominantly Hispanic, of people calling up and not reporting balls of light or orbs or UFOs, but reporting witches. I saw a witch, man. It was flying across the prairie. It's like, okay, cool, let me write it down. Witness described ball of light as witch. So, we're getting into that subcultural belief system thing, which I think is very important. Skinwalkers are very spooky. I may have had an encounter with one, which I detail in my Stalking the Trickster book. I was called in on a black magic case involving a very nasty Navajo witch doctor and a curse, and had a very interesting encounter while I was taking a shower. This thing appeared in my window, which it's the only time I think I've ever climbed out of the shower covered with soap. Kind of freaked me out. The one thing that ties a lot of these trickster characters together is the ability to shapeshift, and I do use that as a very important litmus test in my book, Stalking the Tricksters, which if you read, you'll be able to find out about. Okay, La Llorona, of course, the wailing woman that walks along the canals of the San Luis Valley, supposedly in the tradition wailing after her drowned kids. People in the valley know all the sounds of the valley. They know what bobcats and cougars and the wind. They know what these types of sounds, what they sound like. And when La Llorona shows up, I get a flurry of reports of this wailing woman that's appearing on the canal systems in the valley. The Pewaukee Devil, I wish I had time to digress into this guy. He has been ebbing and flowing through the whole northern New Mexico, southern Colorado area. The earliest reports I can find are from the 20s. Generally, he's a very urbane guy that shows up at during Lent usually, interestingly enough, when people are partying and drinking sinfully. He'll show up and woo the prettiest girl in the bar, and she'll start acting with abandon, tearing off her clothes or doing lascivious things. And usually an uncle or a brother will accost the handsome stranger and say, "What are you doing to my little girl?" His hat will pop off, he'll have horns, his shoe will pop off, he has a cloven hoof. Recently, in the last 30 years, a tail pops out of his pants with a fork on it, which like a spade tail, which I find is a very interesting detail. Anyway, I could go into quite a bit of, I could almost do a whole talk on the Pewaukee Devil. There's quite a number of newspaper articles, including some from the late 80s and the mid-90s that actually have people on the record. The last reports that I had come from the Isleta Gaming Palace, where the devil showed up and was giving people, when they spent all their money, saying, here, let me give you a quarter, try it again, and they win the jackpot. Well, they closed the entire Pueblo casino down on Easter to exorcise it, which was written about by a writer for the Albuquerque Journal. I found that very interesting. I contacted him and he said, "I'm not making this up. This is not a slow news day." Again, oops, going backwards. We have our mystery devil hitchhikers. Several reports that I just can't wrap my head around that are just amazing, including a mystery hitchhiker, a woman, picked up by the uncle of the chief of police of Cuesta, New Mexico, which totally blew me away. He insisted on filing an official police report that he picked up a woman hitchhiker in the middle of the night, in the middle of BF nowhere, and he looked down at her legs when she crawled into the cab of his truck, and she had goat legs and cloven feet instead of cloven hooves instead of feet. Drove like a bat out of hell into town and insisted on filing an official police report. Go look it up if you don't believe me. This is the site of the woman in red case. Notice the big freestanding mountain that I referred to earlier. And also, right in front of where he picked her up, at the same time period, was the only wave of cattle mutilations I investigated that had ritual occult sign left behind at the crime scene. Over 50 head of livestock were mutilated in a 6-year period on the Tres Ritos Ranch, right where the uncle of the chief of police picked up the the devil woman. Devil woman. Hey, more special effects. How you like that? Hey, all you PowerPoint people, I rock. One of my favorite subcultural beliefs in the valley is the belief that when lenticular clouds show up over the mountains, UFOs are going to be flying around. Back in 2004, we had a appearance of a huge lenticular cloud just north of Taos that witnesses reported hundreds of small scout ships seemed to be coming and going from this cloud, and at one point the wind separated and allowed a window into the cloud, and they could see gleaming metallic surface within the cloud. It lasted for several hours. A number of witnesses reported this to me. It was mentioned on the Jeff Wren's website as well, and there's a good picture of the cloud. This is a cloud that I saw over the Great Sand Dunes upon leaving the Baca Grande Crestone area. I'm traveling west on Road T, and I look over and I see this perfect saucer cloud over the sand dunes, and I was so struck by its perfect form that I stopped and took this picture. And I was with my brother, and I got back in the car, and we're driving along. A couple minutes later, we're talking about this. Wow, that's a weird cloud. We look over, it was gone. So, hey, I saw it with my own eyes, and then it was gone. Well, we could go on and on here with stuff like this. This is one of my favorite subcultural belief systems. People in the south end of the valley of the Hispanic heritage tend to have this this longing for a UFO to hover, because if a UFO hovers over a specific spot, grab your neighbors or your relatives and dig for treasure. And I've been shown Spanish coins supposedly found using this. I thought it was leprechauns. If there's a rainbow, you dig at the end of the rainbow, and the leprechaun left gold there. Well, in the San Luis Valley, if a UFO hovers, dig underneath. You might find treasure. Anybody ever heard that from any other culture? Okay, just checking. Well, now that we've kind of gone through the San Luis Valley a little bit, I want to talk about what we really should be talking about, and that is targeting our investigative focus already. We need to identify viable regions, and I gave you an example of my thinking about that using the 5 points that I illustrated and outlined before. Unusual geophysical properties, a history of anomalous events, sacredness by the indigenous people, and again, a government military interest in the area. So what we need to do is identify these regions. We need to fully train and equip local investigators. That's why I think the MUFON model for the investigative process is a very viable one. If you have local people on the ground who are have neighbors and have a network of sources in the local community and a local phone number, people tend to open up to you more. I mean, if Linda Howe or some of these hotshot, investigators come into an area, it's very difficult for them to get people to open up. And if you live there, people tend to trust you. They tend to, open up to you, and especially if they know you're not going to violate any request for anonymity, which is very important. So what do we do once we've identified these gung-ho investigators in a viable area? We equip them with a mobile hard data monitoring array and a fixed surveillance net. I'm going to talk about my San Luis Valley project in a second. There is no substitute for triangulation, corroboration, and proper investigation. Okay? I have done that. I have tried to do this in a way that can be taken seriously by law enforcement, by the scientific community, and by ex-military folks who have been helping me. I have compiled one of the largest databases of unusual experiences from a single geographic region. One of your own probably has the largest, Ann Druffel. Okay, I won't even talk about Greer and his contact experience. 18 people were with him. 12 of them saw a golden glow appear around him, and according to Greer, 12 different types of ET elders told him they were under attack by the U.S. government inside their alien spaceport in Mount Blanca, as he put it, Blanca Peak. I spanked him publicly for that. Anyway, here's a view of the sand dunes just to give you a little better idea of the size of this. It's about 15 miles away, just to give you a sense. Oh boy, here we go. For those of you with queasy stomachs, I do have some Pepto-Bismol in the back. I won't dwell on some of these images too long. This is how I first became aware of the San Luis Valley when I was 10 years old. I saw it was some like rag. It wasn't the Enquirer or the News World. It was something similar. It was sitting there at the checkout stand at the Safeway in Bellevue, Washington. I saw this photograph and the headlines, "Flying Saucers Killed My Horse." And I was just gobsmacked. I said, Mom, you got to give me a dime. I need to buy this. I need it. I want to read it. And boy, I convinced her. She bought it for me. I devoured this article before we got home. This is the first major international news story, probably the only international news story that the San Luis Valley has ever had, about a flying saucer supposedly killing this horse. All the flesh was taken from the tip of the nose to the shoulders, and it became an international news story. And people would line the roads in the area by the hundreds looking for UFOs. Anybody want to buy Snippy? Snippy's for sale. They articulated her bones. They're on display in Alamosa. They put her up on eBay in 2006 with a $30,000 reserve. Some Japanese guy, I think was the highest bidder at $1,800, he said he wanted to turn her into a tie rack. I love that. What a great tie rack. Either that or, like one of those little lawn jockeys, stick that on your front lawn just to, increase the real estate value of your neighborhood. Anyway, Snippy is for sale. See me after class. I'll put in a good word for you if you want to go below 30,000. One of the things that not many people know, of course, how many people have heard of the Snippy case? Okay, a few of you. Linda Howe, of course, loves to tout the case of Lady the horse. Of course, the press, in their infinite wisdom, heard the name Snippy, who was actually Lady's sire, and said, well, Snippy sounds better, so we're going to call the horse Snippy. That's your media for you, right? One of the things that people don't know is that some bison were also mutilated during this time period in the San Luis Valley. And isn't it interesting? The Native Americans around this time stopped honoring Blanca Peak. They stopped doing a sacred pilgrimage to the mountain. Some of them would do it privately, but an official blessing hadn't taken place since about a year before this. And the two animals most revered by the natives at the, for quite a number of years was the horse and the buffalo. And I find it interesting, the first cattle mutilation featured a horse and a buffalo. Kind of weird. Snippy's the first cattle mutilation, and we've never really had a case like it, and it was a horse. What's wrong with this picture? Well, what is up with these dead cows? Well, first of all, it represents thousands of pounds of physical evidence. As I noted before, I have investigated about 200 cases, maybe a little more now, and out of those I've determined that 40 of them could not be explained. I am not a veterinary pathologist, okay? I am not an expert, but I know veterinary pathologists. I used to know a hematologist. I've worked with crime labs. I've worked with law enforcement. I've worked with diagnostic labs. Those are the people that can really determine cause of death and what caused disfigurement of these animals. A cattle mutilation can be defined as the following. An animal that has no visible means of how it died. You can't tell or ascertain how it died or why. And various soft tissue organs have been excised and removed. There is never any evidence left behind, no tire tracks, with a few exceptions. There have been cases where we have had some evidence. But generally the crime scene is devoid of any evidence. And the organs that are taken, usually soft tissue organs, an eye, tongue, reproductive organs, mammary organs, the udders of a cow. The organs that are taken are generally the organs that humans are most likely to develop cancer. Now, how many people know that cattle hemoglobin is almost a virtual match to human hemoglobin? Show of hands. Cattle hemoglobin is a 99.9 to 9 places match to human hemoglobin. What's number 2? You got it. 99.9 to 7 places. I find that very intriguing. We're going to talk about that in a second. Let's first talk about humans' relationship to cattle. Okay, the Indians, when they first saw cattle, called them hooved locusts. Well, we have been sacrificing animals to the gods for thousands of years. Has anybody ever wondered why? Why do we sacrifice goats and sheep and cattle to gods? Even our own. Remember Isaac and Abraham? Well, I think that there's some rationale that might explain that, and it has to do with the mutilation phenomenon. There have been attempts over the years to debunk the phenomenon. The Rommel report was one. Of course, the 89 cases that they cited were part of the cases that were equivocal that we could probably explain away as unusual scavenger action. Remember I said 200 cases I've investigated, 160 of them, could be predators, could be scavengers. You know, when in doubt, assume a mundane explanation is kind of my rule of thumb. But this particular case is when I kissed the tar baby, and you can't see him, but he's still stuck to my face. I went out on the first case that I actually investigated was due to 24 photographs that the Saguache County Sheriff gave me 2 weeks into my first investigative effort to write my article. Remember, I wrote that article. And I asked the Saguache County Sheriff, hey, do you have any files on cattle mutilation cases, which officially never occurred in the San Luis Valley, according to the databases of Linda Howe, Tom Adams, David Perkins, and others, Peter Jordan. And he said, yeah, there's a box down there with some photographs in it. Let me find it for you. And he was able to find it. And he gave me 24 photographs. 2 of them had writing on the back. And this was the first one that I went out to investigate. Eventually, I was able to find out where all the animals in the photographs came from and from what ranches, because fortunately I was able to locate the deputy that investigated the cases. Well, this was the first one I went out because it was the closest to my house. In 1993, January, I went out to the Sutherland Ranch. They told me this weird story about an ancient antique helicopter that flew over their house while they were having dinner, and then 20 minutes later, it flew back over the way, their house back the way it came, and they ran outside and they saw this, 1950, whirlybird, mustard yellow in color, fly over the house, and they thought, that is so strange. Why is this guy, flying over our ranch? And he seemed to have been landed a mile down in their field. So the following morning they went out and they found their bull mutilated. All the insects that landed on the animal died. The animal was not predated. No animal, scavenger would go near it. Even the insects at some point started to stay away from it. And I said, wow, that's an amazing story. Why don't you take me out and show me the spot? So he said, okay. They took me out there and the darn thing was still there. Of course, it was just skin and bones, basically. I said, well, do you mind if I take the skull? And they said, no, go ahead, take the skull. So I took the skull. Well, I go home that night. The next morning I wake up and I've got my little brother word processor and I'm typing up my notes. And what flies over my house? I hear a thump, 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 thump. Look out my window. A mustard yellow 1950 whirlybird flew right over my house. I have witnesses on record. They signed release forms for me to use their names. I knew instantly right then that there's a tricksterish element to this subject matter, that we are not dealing only with aliens from another planet. There's something infinitely more complex and more exciting in my view. I think aliens from another planet is kind of a boring scenario. I mean, it's like, okay, sure, there's billions of civilizations out there. There has to be. I mean, come on, it's a huge universe. Even in our galaxy, there's at least probably a billion civilizations. An article just came out a couple weeks ago that stated that. That's the the new thinking with astrophysicists. I think that that's a boring explanation. I think there's something going on right around us that's always been here that is creating these synchronistic events to pull us forward in our thinking, to create novelty and change, to topple static structures and create room for creative thought and get us to move forward with our thinking. Well, of course, I took the skull home, right? I had to paint it yellow and hang it on my wall. So there you go. That was the probably the world's only painted, mutilated cow skull. Do horses climb trees? This is a 1,200-pound Morgan horse that was found in a tree. Here's the head, the body, the legs. Probably ate loco weed and went crazy. Ended up trying to jump through the crotch of a tree. Well, javelinas aren't found anywhere near the San Luis Valley. How come we found this one in a tree mutilated? Or how about this deer? It had a perfect hole through its tear duct from one side of its septum to the other. The entire rear end was reamed out, and it was found in the crotch of a tree. I don't have the picture with me here, but we found a baby yak in a tree. Swear to God. There's a yak ranch in the San Luis Valley, and they went missing. One of the babies went missing. They found it pretty high up in a tree, about 20 feet. What's up with the tree thing? How about this one? Woo! Psych. It got hit by a train. This was a real one. This was my last case in March of 1999. I buried the hatchet with the National Institute of Discovery Sciences, who I had been dogging for 6 years to publish your data. I was the only person in the research field that was willing to dog Robert Bigelow and his very spooky bunch of scientists who were engaged in investigating paranormal events, including cattle mutilations. Well, I finally, when John Alexander, the ex-head of non-lethal weapons development, starts getting kind of cross with you, you figure, well, maybe it's not healthy if I keep stepping on these people's toes. I said, okay, I'll stop dogging you. Let's work together. They said, great. They said, you have complete funding for any of your analytical work. We'll send a team to help you out. Here's a list of protocols so we can, you can train all your vets on how to do in-the-field necropsies. We'll pay them. Let's work together. Great. This was the last case I had for 7 years. I find that kind of strange, don't you? Have 200 cases in 6 years, and then for 7 years you don't have one. This is the last one. And this one is very important because, number one, it happened in the wintertime, and there was a long winter coat on the animal. And Linda Howe should take notes, because the first thing I look for when I go out on an unusual livestock death is I look for cut hair follicles. Coyotes, birds, insects do not cut hair. They're not barbers. If you'll notice, there's a good 4-inch section of perfectly cut hair on the muzzle of this animal, on the incisional area. Okay, that to me is smoking gun evidence that something came down and tracked this animal down, which was found 13 feet from its own tracks, by the way, and did these surgical-like incisions on the animal. I won't dwell too long on the gross stuff here, but people say, well, how come none of the downside parts of the animal are ever found mutilated? Well, how about this? Here's a downside mandible excision with the tongue removed, and notice this strange discoloration on the ground, which doesn't conform to blood and fluids, according to the investigative deputy. Of course, Linda thinks that they're gathering genetic material to hybridize aliens. Well, if that's the case, why don't they just break the locks on the local rendering plant and go in there in the slaughterhouse and take all the blood and organs, whatever? I mean, come on. There's tons of genetic material there. Why go out and, get Bessie that belongs to Farmer Brown? Doesn't make sense to me, Linda. Got to be something else going on here. You got to get creative with your thinking. Well, Sony gets creative with their thinking. They say, hey, they've been abducting cows and mutilating them. Let's turn the tables on them and send the cows back in one of our ads. I love this. Of course, the ranch is going, and I thought my Bessie was gone and mutilated. Well, she's back. Okay. There are some very good theories about why these animal death cases are occurring that don't have to do with genetic material and hybridization. One of the best early theories was proposed by my mentor, David Perkins, who's written the foreword to all 4 of my published books, that he instantly, after 4 years of investigations from 75 through 79, he was Linda Howe's cameraman on the Strange Harvest documentary. One of the first people Linda went to when she was trying to find out about this mystery. Well, David in 79 realized that areas of high incidence of animal death cases are downwind and downstream of where we utilize or mine uranium. Now, I find that very interesting because the San Luis Valley is the only area in the United States that has no pollution. What a perfect place for a control group, right? For your baseline data. Any scientists out there? Okay, well, never mind. Anyway, Izzy is really, I think, one of our brightest thinkers. Again, he doesn't go around promoting himself. He's very quiet behind the scenes. George W. Bush's roommate for 2 years at Yale. boy, I could tell you some stories. I used to have fun with this one. It's like they were all sitting around in the hallway one day, drinking beer, and one of the guys goes, we're the sons of the rich and privileged and the powerful. It's highly possible that one of us sitting here could actually end up being president of the United States, except for you, George. That's my favorite one. I could tell you others that have to do with bisexuality, rampant drug use, other things, but we won't go there. Well, there's no pollution in the San Luis Valley, but there is pollution close to the valley, and it's at the Summitville Mines Superfund site, 40 miles to the west of the valley. It has trashed the upper 17 miles of the Alamosa River. Well, isn't it interesting that 7 cases that I had in a year's time were along the Alamosa River or canals coming off the Alamosa River? And then Westward Magazine in Denver published an expose by Brian Rimmer, an EPA scientist who was growing sheep between these 2 dots. Why? Because he would let them graze for 90 days, and then they would take them to a lab, and what would they do? They'd mutilate them and then test the organs for heavy metals. They found 600 times the amount of copper and heavy metals in the animals. They shouldn't even have been alive. And he was so horrified that the EPA wanted to cover it up and not tell the ranchers that he went to the press and spilled the beans. Bing! Little light bulb went off over my head when I read that. So we may be seeing an environmental monitoring process going on here. Well, let's move on. Ted Oliphant, who was the Fife, Alabama chief of police, had a number of cases, I forget, 19 or 20 cases around the Fife, Alabama area, and he uncovered evidence that the Army and possibly other governmental agencies were conducting bioweapons experiments on local ranchers' livestock. He wrote a very interesting article, which you can find online called Dead Cows I Have Known. I do recommend you read that because of his very tireless law enforcement work. Well, in 1996, because of the outbreak of mad cow disease, or prion disease, as they later found out 2 years later, prions are the smallest life form known to man. They're called transmissible spongiform encephalopathy, is the affliction that occurs when prions start kicking off and misfolding proteins. They're 1,000 times smaller than the smallest virus, and you can't kill them. It takes up to 3,000 degrees to kill prions, and they have to be soaked in pure chlorine for quite a substantial period of time before they go inert. Even though they're called a life form, isn't one of the definitions of life, it replicates, but if it's alive, shouldn't you be able to kill it? Well, the British didn't know any of this. The Nobel Prize for Medicine was awarded Stanley Prusiner, who figured out what a prion was 2 years later. So what happened to the 6 million cattle that were destroyed and burnt with only 1,200 degrees of heat? That's a lot of prions and a lot of bone ash. Where do you think the bone ash went? Anybody know? It was used as an ingredient in fertilizer and sent to 70 countries around the world. Careful what you eat. So, are they sacred cows or hoof locusts? Cattle are the largest source of freshwater pollution. They're the second largest source of natural methane, ozone-depleting gas. They're the largest reason why deserts are being created. And you know why they're cutting down all the rainforests in South America? To make room for more cattle. Where does anthrax come from? Anybody know? Cows. They're hoof locusts. They are the second most detrimental thing to this biosphere besides humans. Maybe something's trying to warn us. Could it be the planet? I don't think it's the aliens. Is it you? Don't get me on my soapbox. I could really go. Well, remember I said that we didn't have any mutilation cases from 1999 to 2006. You know where they all went? They decided to take a vacation in South America. They had 3,300 cases in that time period in South America. So, hey, we did all our sampling in America. Let's go down to South America. My favorite case from this time period was a 60,000-gallon cistern that was drained in a matter of hours, and a mutilated cow was left inside the empty cistern. I love that one. How poetic. All right. I just can't avoid this subject. Your tax dollars, boys with toys. What's happening? The choppers. Is there a government connection to UFOs? I already mentioned the Levita military operations area. You know, we've all heard of Area 51 where they develop and test exotic aerial craft, right? Well, the San Luis Valley, I think, is where they take it out and try to find out how people will respond to it. Do they make a UFO report? Do they report it to the cops? Does the story end up in the newspaper? Do the newspapers end up getting it on the wire services? Do television shows come and start covering the story? The process of dissemination in culture is very important to my particular little equation. Well, the underground bases, too, we could really go with there. Out of all the cattle mutilation cases that have been documented, you know how many helicopter sightings have been also documented in and around these sites? At last count, around 400. I didn't know aliens flew helicopters. Well, here's September 7, 2005. We have a helicopter with some objects underneath. They're probably large bumblebees, would be my guess, but still, it makes a titillating image. Here's a picture I took of an orb that seemed to be following a cargo plane. Of course, my favorite one was watching a silver, unpainted C-131 cargo plane flying over Blanca Peak. I had 50-power binoculars on it, and there were no clouds in the sky, and out of the clear blue, it just went flash and disappeared. And then about 5 seconds later, the sound of the engines sounded like somebody hit a CD player pause button. I went to the guy I was waiting to interview. I can't believe what I just saw. He goes, oh, I've seen that a bunch of times. No big deal. Come on in. Let's talk. I said, okay. People around the valley, they're so used to this stuff, it's not a big deal to them. It's weird, man. This stuff happened over L.A. CNN, everybody would be all over it, boy. Let me tell you. It's funny how people get sort of entrained into a different sense of normalcy. Oh, some more special effects. Whoop. Okay. The Levita military operations area. Here's the Sangre de Cristos. They go up. Here's the San Luis Valley. Isn't it interesting that one of my formula points, you know, nearby military presence should hold true here. And they've already expanded from here over to here, so it's actually bigger now since I found this particular image. So we do have the military expanding its presence into the valley. And we have reports of jets and dogfights with UFOs. And we have a crash of a UFO in the Great Sand Dunes in 1969, where F-4 Phantoms were seen chasing by two archaeologists, by the way, were seen chasing this UFO across the dune field. It tried to outmaneuver them, hit the top of a dune, and tumbled into the dune field and exploded. It took 3 days for the trucks to lay big steel mats to go and recover it, and it was taken away, and everybody was like, oh, we didn't see anything, don't talk to us. It took them 25, 30 years to come forward. F-16s fly around like bumblebees, and they're not supposed to fly, planes aren't supposed to fly below 500 feet. Well, here's one at about 200. What's wrong with this picture? Oh, come on. I couldn't have put you guys all to sleep. What's wrong with this picture? What's the Air Force doing making tunnels? Isn't that an oxymoron? It's like military intelligence. Underground Bases and Tunnels, What's the Government Trying to Hide, is a very good book by Richard Sauter. Here are the reported areas of underground entrances or bases in the San Luis Valley area. Of course, at the top is the famous NORAD Cheyenne Mountain location. Anybody notice anything? They're all connected, potentially. I find that very interesting. We do know that there's a tunnel from Los Alamos to Dulce hearsay evidence from a underground miner who helped build the tunnel is what I base that on. I don't really have time to go into all this material, but remember the big earthquake in Virginia, and then there was one in Colorado? It happened right here. This is actually the location of an earthquake in 2002 that was 3.8. Halliburton's building something over there. They're expanding their little network in the San Luis Valley, if this line of thinking is correct. Of course, Mr. Halliburton himself, Darth Cheney, I mean, the guy spent most of his 8 years in the White House underground, expanding the vice president's residence under the National or the Naval Observatory. Again, here's the gorge, site of a potential underground location. Here's these amazing, huge buildings over by Sheep Mountain, just on the other side of the Great Sand Dunes. I went in there, snuck in there one time, pretending I was lost, and it looked like a movie set. There were 2 inches of dust, and nobody had been in there yet. It's the largest tax revenue source in Huerfano County, and I was instantly surrounded. It took about 4 or 5 minutes for them to realize I was there, and I was escorted off the Arco Permian CO2 plant. Anyway, people have seen objects coming in and out of the mountains. I've got several really good cases in my books around this area. Again, here's Ute Mountain, where the mystery hitchhiker woman case was. That's also a location of a supposed underground base. And this entire area out here is owned by Donald Rumsfeld, 50,000 acres. We have all sorts of objects seen flying in and out of this area. I find it very interesting that our ex-Secretary of Defense should have such a large parcel of property right at the gateway or doorway of a alleged underground base location. We can move on here. A little more special effects. Of course, the Benowitz case, I won't even begin to talk about Dulce. Boy, I could do a whole talk just on that. I do believe Dulce is a red herring. I think the real location of the facility is 18 miles west of Archuleta Mesa. Get out your topo maps and check it out. How much does the government really know? Well, we know they know a lot. That's why they're a lot more confused than we are. Of course, I want to reiterate my log of unusual events. I've been able to discern patterns of activity, and I think that there is some sort of rationale for patterning. Here is a map of UFO sightings, Bigfoot sightings, and Black Triangle reports from the San Luis Valley. Each one of these flying saucers represents 5 reports. Just to give you a little idea. Now we're looking from the north, looking south in the valley. This is north down here, and this is south. Okay. Here's some UFO photographs. This is a farmer was out checking on his livestock. He saw this object. He was able to get a picture of it. Another blurry UFO shot, I know. This is the Lobel Light. This has been reported all the way back into the early 30s, maybe even the late 20s. It seems to hang out around the Cuesta area, Rio Rancho area. Shows up every now and then. It's huge. It's hundreds of yards long, up to a quarter of a mile, maybe even a third of a mile long. This is a real UFO. Notice the plasma sheath around it. This is a automatic, fast camera, motorized camera, taking pictures of this object by Nick Schmidt. Looks a little different from that, right? Here, we'll go through that again. That's a real UFO, folks. That's not. If you look carefully, you can see where the glue squirted out from the ping pong ball right here. Sorry for you George Adamski fans out there, but Ray Stanford, who I do really admire, was told by Adamski and shown how he faked his UFO photos. I hate to rain on your parade. Probably the most famous UFO sighting was the Tim Edwards footage in Salida, Colorado in September 1995. He got 6 minutes of extremely good daylight photos, or daylight footage. Here's a still photograph from it. Tim died kind of mysteriously on the operating table about 3 years ago. I find that a little disturbing. Well, what I've been working on the last couple of years is putting together a high-tech surveillance setup around the San Luis Valley to monitor the airspace 24/7. The locations are a regional location on top of that big freestanding mountain where Bigfoot lives here. This is Lookout Peak here. This is Methodist Mountain. These are 11 to 12,000 foot mountains here. This is our regional array. This will give us regional coverage from Albuquerque to Leadville. The inside triangle is focused on where you saw all those UFO, that clustering of UFO sightings. This is a 40-mile leg, smaller triangle. And if I had had time, if I hadn't got stuck in traffic, I could click right now and show you the San Luis Valley live feed and play with the camera and show you. Hopefully by the end of the year we'll have the first 3 cameras up. We only have 2 of the cameras up right now. This is how you do good science, folks. Triangulation, corroboration, investigation. This is what MUFON should do. Oh my goodness. Woo! I'm rocking here. Woo! More special effects. Thank you. Lights in the sky, dead sky, cows on the ground. Well, I'm a big fan of Jacques Vallée. It's the illogic of metalogic. More special effects. Thanks, Jacques. Here he is on a bad hair day. I do recommend every book that the man has written. Messengers of Deception was mentioned by someone in the audience earlier. My favorite book is probably Dimensions, Second Revelations. Confrontations is very good. It's lasting effects with witnesses and people that have been affected by UFO encounters. You want connections? Okay, here's one. On October 17, 1997, 20 million trees were blown down in less than 5 minutes on the Continental Divide just west of Fort Collins. 2 weeks later, mad cow disease broke out in the deer herds. It's called chronic wasting disease. Since then, this chronic wasting disease outbreak has spread to 32 states east of the Mississippi. I think nature was warning us. These trees have a patterning to their blowdown. I took aerial photographs of this. I happened to be in the middle of investigating this case when I met Lawrence Rockefeller. He was so blown away by my theorizing, he funded me for 2 years. Not many people can say that. I was very fortunate to meet with him and have a relationship with him. I started calling him Uncle Larry. He kind of liked that. Anyway, I think that there's something to the chronic wasting disease scenario. I think it ties in with the cattle mutilation phenomenon. Here's other tree circles, crop circles, if you will, in trees that I've investigated in Colorado. These are the types of blowdowns that we should be investigating. These are random blowdowns that nature does, and I think that nature's trying to talk to us. Uncle Larry was really sweet. He, as I said, he was very supportive of my efforts in the late 90s. And Ray Stanford, I think you should get out here and have him talk with you. He is by far the best ufologist and scientist in ufology today. He has come up with some amazing theories that he's going to be publishing in a peer-reviewed journal if he can get into one. He's been working about 6 years on a paper that talks about magnetohydrodynamic propulsion and the optical physics behind the propulsion mechanisms that these crafts seem to exhibit. He's taken 49 films of UFOs, including the famous opening sequence in the show In Search Of, the UFO in the Clouds. That was Ray's first film that he took in 1956. We need hard data investigation and research, folks. All these anecdotal accounts, I mean, they're great and they're entertaining, but they're not getting us anywhere. We need to move forward. And I think that this is the only way to do it, is with hard data research. So where does that leave us? It's Benevolent Space Brothers. Here he is. He's either coming to save us or eat us. Religion, trust it. It's all part of God's plan, well, or His design. Or your government, don't ask questions. Just, bend over and assume the position. Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, I think, have been on the right track. Archetypes are at work and play. My book, The Trickster, is a good example of that sort of thinking. Jacques Vallée says, hey, it's a cultural thermostat that's going on and off. When the culture gets cold and kind of, boring, UFOs show up to heat things up. When things get too hot, the UFOs start going away. and it's always this up and down sort of hot cold scenario. Of course, Charles Fort, the original paranormal investigator, if you will, in the turn of the century up into the 20s and 30s, his analysis was, we're just property. That one might have a ring to it too. Well, I like John Keel's. He came up with the theory that they're just here to mess with us and confound us. So anyway, that's been my job, to mess and confound with you, and I hope that I haven't put too many people to sleep out there. But we do live in a magical reality, and I'm doing my small part to try to bring our thinking and understanding outside of the box. And I really appreciate you guys showing up and putting up with my bad jokes and everything. And do see me after class here, buy some of my books or DVDs, help me pay my bills. And if we have time, which we probably don't, I'd like to open the floor up for any questions if you might have them.